November 10th, 2015, Merrillville, Indiana. After a late basketball game at Calumet College, 20-year-old Elena Brooks, 8 months pregnant, sent one last text to her mother. "I'm meeting Darius tonight. Don't wait up." Hours later, her silver sedan was discovered in a dark parking lot near an abandoned elementary school. On the ground lay her broken glasses and a single muddy sneaker. Elena had vanished. By morning, frantic calls went unanswered. Flyers papered shop windows, neighbors lit candles, and the quiet suburb found itself united in fear and grief. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years. The posters faded, the vigils grew smaller, and her name slipped from headlines. But her mother never stopped waiting. Then, 5 years later, a rusted shovel and Elena's belongings surfaced near the same woods where she was last seen. The case erupted back to life. What really happened on that cold November night? Subscribe, follow, and turn on the notification bell. Because tonight, we reopen one of Indiana's most haunting cold cases. November 10th, 2015, Merrillville, Indiana. The cold air bit at Elena Brooks's cheeks as she left the roaring lights and echoing cheers of Calumet College's basketball gym behind her. The sharp whistle of the final buzzer still rang in her ears, blending with the crunch of frosted grass beneath her boots. Her hand instinctively drifted to her swollen belly, a silent promise growing inside her, nearly ready to greet the world. 8 months. She could hardly believe it herself. Every movement, every breath now, was for two. Outside, the campus was quieter than usual. Floodlights flickered across the parking lot, chasing the long shadows of scattered cars and leafless trees. Elena pulled her phone from her coat pocket, the cracked case a silent witness to too many accidental drops. She hesitated only a second before typing out the text. "I'm meeting Darius tonight. Don't wait up." She sent it to her mother, a ritual for every plan, every errand, every late-night craving run since she first learned the baby was coming. Even now, Elena smiled faintly at the thought. Her mom, the tireless night shift nurse, always asking for updates, sometimes before Elena could remember to send them. Tonight, though, Elena's nerves fluttered with something new. Excitement? Dread? The world seemed impossibly still, as if holding its breath. She tried to shake off the unease as she ducked into her little silver sedan, the one she'd bought herself after endless shifts, bussing tables and folding towels at the laundromat. The drive was short. Too short, maybe. The old elementary school sat on the edge of town, left behind years ago, a skeleton of memories, playground rusted over and windows boarded shut. Williams Elementary. Even as a kid, Elena had felt the place was haunted, but tonight, it was just empty, silent, waiting. She parked across the street, triple-checked her door locks, and pulled out her phone again. No new messages. Darius was always late. She leaned her head against the steering wheel, fighting the sharp ache in her lower back. Only the distant rumble of a train broke the silence, and a cold wind rattled the dry weeds that pushed up through cracked pavement. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and forced herself to breathe deeply, steadying the nerves fluttering in her chest. What would tonight bring? She hadn't seen Darius face to face in weeks. Their last conversation, tense, awkward, full of questions neither wanted to answer, had left more wounds than closure. Still, she clung to hope. Maybe he'd come around. Maybe he'd be ready to talk about the baby. Maybe he'd be different. Her phone buzzed. A simple message. "Meet me at the school." She glanced again at the shadowy building, its windows staring back like hollow eyes. A shiver ran up her spine, but she pushed it down, grabbing her purse and keys before stepping out into the brittle night air. She didn't notice the figure waiting near the edge of the woods, half hidden by the tangled brush. She only heard the sound, one sharp footstep, then another, muffled by fallen leaves. Elena's breath came faster, and for the first time that night, she wished she'd stayed in her car just a little longer. Inside the woods, the darkness seemed deeper, heavier. The moon played hide-and-seek behind a curtain of clouds, throwing just enough light to outline the old jungle gym and a single battered swing still clinging to its chains. Elena called out, voice barely more than a whisper. No answer. She fumbled for her phone, but her fingers slipped, and it tumbled to the ground. In that split second, everything changed. She bent to retrieve the phone, and the world tilted. Pain, confusion, a sudden blur. Something knocked the glasses from her face, sent her stumbling sideways. Her shoe snagged on a root. She cried out, voice swallowed by the trees. The woods were silent. The darkness closed in. Hours later, a security guard making his rounds found her car in the lot across from the school. The driver's seat was empty, a purse abandoned on the floorboard. The keys were gone. On the ground near the edge of the woods, just out of reach, a pair of broken glasses and a single muddy sneaker. No sign of Elena. The news traveled fast. By morning, her mother's frantic calls went unanswered. Friends texted, then called, then drove past Elena's house, praying she was asleep, hoping this was just another miscommunication. But inside, everyone knew. Elena was gone. Police cordoned off the area, flashlights bobbing through the misty trees as sunrise painted the world gray and gold. Reporters soon followed, their questions cold and clinical. The schoolyard became a crime scene, the woods behind it crawling with uniforms and dogs, searchers calling her name long after hope had begun to fade. But hope is stubborn. For the first time, the quiet suburb of Merrillville felt its heart crack open. Posters with Elena's face, the warm smile, the hand resting protectively on her stomach, appeared in coffee shops and gas stations, taped to telephone poles and shop windows. Candlelight vigils sprang up outside her house, neighbors weeping together, holding each other a little tighter. The promise of new life had vanished into the night, leaving only questions, fear, and the echo of footsteps in the dark. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the streetlights, the truth waited, silent and hidden, for someone brave enough to find it. Long before that cold November night, Elena Brooks was the kind of person who made every space warmer, every burden lighter. In the tidy two-bedroom home she shared with her mother on a quiet street in Merrillville, Indiana, you'd find laughter clinging to the curtains and the scent of cinnamon lingering from her favorite coffee cake recipe. Elena's room was a collection of color, handwritten notes tacked to the walls, photos of friends from Calumet College, stacks of textbooks on social work, and the neat rows of baby clothes folded in anticipation of Unsolved. Everything in her world felt filled with hope and small, earnest dreams. She grew up watching her mother, Linda Brooks, slip out into the Indiana night for her nursing shifts, always returning with tired eyes, but a fierce determination to protect and provide. Elena understood, even as a child, that life wasn't fair or easy. But her mother had taught her, that kindness could bend even the hardest days towards something softer. It was a lesson she carried into adulthood, always texting her mom about her plans, sharing silly selfies and late-night snack cravings, letting Linda know when she'd be home and always promising, "I'll be careful." Calumet College was Elena's second home. She'd chosen social work not because it was easy, but because she saw herself in the teenagers who wandered lost through the system, shuffling between foster homes, always looking for someone who cared enough to listen. She'd volunteered at after-school programs, mentored at-risk girls, and spent long hours researching child psychology, determined to become the kind of advocate she'd needed as a lonely, quiet girl in the wake of her parents' bitter divorce. Elena's circle was small but close, mostly classmates, a few old friends from high school, and the church youth group that had embraced her when she was still unsure of herself. In Merrillville, trust came easily. Doors stayed unlocked, neighbors waved across driveways, and true crime stories were something that happened on the evening news, never on their own sleepy streets. No one in town believed that real danger could hide behind the painted white fences and carefully trimmed lawns. But even in places that seemed safe, cracks always form beneath the surface. Elena knew the weight of secrets. Her pregnancy had startled her friends and shocked her church community, but she'd faced the gossip with quiet resolve. She'd never named the baby's father publicly, but those closest to her knew the truth. Darius Coleman, 4 years her senior, a once bright athlete whose promise had faded after high school. Darius was charming and funny, but trouble seemed to follow him. And lately, he'd grown distant, burdened by fears of adulthood, responsibility, and the looming shadow of child support. Elena never spoke ill of Darius, even as the weeks stretched into silence. She still hoped, perhaps naively, that he would return, not just for her, but for the child whose tiny heartbeat she'd heard on the monitor, whose kicks woke her in the night. When the baby's due date approached, she'd started talking to her belly, sharing her dreams for the future and her fears that somehow she wouldn't be enough. On the night she disappeared, Elena had been unusually quiet, her mind a swirl of worries she couldn't name. Earlier, she'd laughed with friends in the crowded bleachers, cheering for the Calumet Coyotes and joking about baby names. She never let on that she was nervous about meeting Darius later, though her best friend, Melissa, would later recall the way Elena hugged her goodbye. Tight, lingering, as if she were saying more than she could put into words. In the days that followed her disappearance, the world inside Elena's home collapsed into panic and disbelief. Her mother, who'd worked back-to-back shifts to pay the bills and prepare for the new arrival, refused to accept that her daughter had simply run away. Linda printed hundreds of flyers, each one bearing Elena's graduation photo, hopeful, gentle, a glimpse of the mother she would never get to become. The house, once filled with music and conversation, became a command center, lists of phone numbers on the fridge, news crews calling for interviews, friends leaving meals on the porch and offering prayers. Merrillville's quiet streets echoed with urgency. Friends formed search parties, fanning out across parks, alleys, and abandoned lots. They combed the woods behind the elementary school, called Elena's name into the cold, unresponsive air, and gathered at the local church to share memories and theories. Whispers began to spread. Some said Elena had been struggling, that she was afraid of motherhood, that she might have run away to start over. Others insisted it was impossible. Elena was too grounded, too responsible, too loving to leave without a word. As the days turned to nights, the community came together in ways that surprised even the most cynical among them. Candlelight vigils burned late into the evening on Elena's porch, the flicker of hope reflected in every tear-streaked face. Her photo, belly rounded and hands protectively cradling the unborn child, became a symbol for all that could be lost in a single, unguarded moment. Yet even as hope stubbornly persisted, a chill settled over Merrillville, a sense that something precious had been stolen from them. The normalcy they'd trusted was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. Every parent clung tighter to their children. Every unlocked door now seemed an invitation to danger. In the silence that followed, Elena's absence echoed louder than any shout. But for her mother, for her friends, and for the small town that had always believed itself safe, there could be no rest. Not until answers came. Not until Elena's story was told, no matter how painful the truth might be. The hours after Elena left the college gym would become a blur of timelines, conflicting memories, and mounting dread. Everything seemed so ordinary at first, a normal night in a quiet town. But by 9:30 p.m., as the gym lights dimmed and the crowd trickled home, Elena was already on her way to meet a past she wasn't sure she could face alone. She left the familiar comfort of her friends behind, walking steadily toward the parking lot, her keys jingling in her hand. The Indiana wind whipped around her, rattling loose leaves across the blacktop as she glanced once more at her phone. The last message, simple and direct. "Meet me at Williams Elementary School." The words glowed cold on the screen, as if even her phone understood the gravity in their simplicity. The road to the abandoned school was lined with silent houses and empty fields. Elena's car, a silver sedan with the back seat cluttered with textbooks and a tiny pair of pink baby booties, moved quietly through the dark. Streetlights flickered as she drove, casting fleeting patterns across the dashboard. Her thoughts were a swirl of hope and unease. Would Darius finally show up? Would he listen? Or would he run from responsibility as he always had? By 10 p.m., her phone went silent. The battery icon, red and blinking, was the last thing she saw before the screen died. She'd promised herself she would be brave, but in that moment, a chill slid through her. She checked her surroundings. The sagging chain-link fence, the faded playground, the way the woods behind the school seemed to swallow all light. For a moment, she wondered if she should turn back, but she couldn't let fear stop her now. Minutes stretched into uncertainty. Headlights flashed briefly in the distance, then vanished. Somewhere a dog barked. Elena stepped out of her car, clutching her coat tight, eyes darting to every shadow. She waited. Each breath became a cloud in the icy air. No sign of Darius. Only the wind and the hum of the highway beyond the trees. The details of what happened next would be reconstructed from fragments, bits of evidence, passing recollections, and chilling silence. Witnesses would later claim they saw a tall figure near the old schoolyard, lingering where the streetlights faded. A jogger noticed a silver sedan parked awkwardly, engine still warm. But by then, it was already too late. Sometime after 10 p.m., Elena vanished. The next morning dawned gray and raw. Elena's mother, groggy from a long night shift, noticed her daughter's bed untouched and the house eerily quiet. At first, she rationalized the absence. Maybe Elena had stayed at a friend's house or decided to visit a cousin. But the worry grew heavier with each unanswered call. By noon, panic set in. Linda Brooks dialed every number she knew, her voice trembling as she repeated the same questions. Each one more desperate. Had anyone seen Elena? Did she mention a change of plans? Was she okay? The police were called. Officers arrived at the house, taking notes, asking routine questions. When they heard Elena's last text had been to meet someone at the abandoned Williams Elementary, a cold seriousness overtook their faces. Patrol cars sped to the scene, red and blue lights washing the vacant lot in urgency. Elena's silver sedan was discovered in the parking lot, sitting alone like a ghostly reminder of her presence. The driver's seat was pushed back, a sign she'd been uncomfortable, her purse still on the floorboard. The keys were missing. A thin film of frost had crept over the windshield. On the passenger side, an old hospital appointment card lay on the mat, scribbled with a date just days away, a prenatal checkup she'd never attend. The search spread quickly. Officers and volunteers combed the grounds, eyes scanning every inch for a sign, any sign, of the missing woman. Near the edge of the woods, among tangled undergrowth and mud, a pair of broken glasses was found, lenses smeared with dirt, the frame twisted as if wrenched in panic. A single shoe, muddy and waterlogged, rested a few yards away, its pale pink fabric a jarring contrast against the brown, damp leaves. The woods themselves seemed to hold their breath. Dogs barked and whined as they tracked scents that faded into nothing. Searchers called Elena's name until their voices cracked, the cold air biting at their throats. For hours, the only answer was the lonely creak of the old-school swings and the whisper of wind through bare branches. The evidence felt incomplete, a trail that started with certainty and then dissolved into thin air. There were no clear footprints, no witnesses who saw a struggle, no sign of Elena's phone or the keys to her car. Only scattered belongings and an overwhelming sense that something terrible had happened just beyond the reach of the streetlights. Rumors began to swirl almost immediately. Some whispered that Elena had run away, overcome by the fear of young motherhood and a future she hadn't planned. Others were convinced something darker had unfolded, that someone she trusted had betrayed her in the most brutal way. The facts, though, refused to align into any neat story. She was simply gone. By evening, the town's sense of safety had shattered. Parents kept their children inside. Police tape flapped in the wind around the parking lot, a silent warning that danger didn't always wear a stranger's face. In every kitchen, in every classroom, people wondered, how could this happen here? How could a young woman, so full of hope, so close to a new life, simply disappear? But for Elena's family, there was no time for questions or blame. Their world narrowed to a single, aching hope that somehow Elena would walk through the door again, safe and smiling, and all of this would become a bad memory. But as darkness fell once more, it became clear that hope alone might not be enough. The first 24 hours after Elena's disappearance stretched into eternity for her family. The anxious hum of Linda Brooks's phone never ceased. Calls from friends, cousins, co-workers, classmates, church members, all hoping for news, all desperate for answers she didn't have. The bright, busy house that once pulsed with laughter and anticipation was transformed into the headquarters of a mother's worst nightmare. Linda clung to routine at first, as if brewing coffee and folding laundry could somehow anchor the world. But her hands trembled and her eyes darted to the clock every few minutes. When hope gave way to terror, she drove from one end of Merrillville to the other, stopping at gas stations, grocery stores, the campus, the diner where Elena had worked. Each familiar place felt foreign, as if the loss of her daughter had altered the very shape of the town. By noon, Linda was at the police station, clutching the only recent photo of Elena she could find. Her daughter, smiling with one hand cradling her belly, and the other raised in a goofy peace sign. The detective listened kindly, but without comfort, his questions methodical and his promises cautious. There was a formality to it all that felt cruel, a mother's panic squeezed into lines on a report, her hope reduced to a case number. Back home, Linda threw herself into action. She printed out hundreds of missing person flyers, her home printer whining and hissing late into the night. She drove through neighborhoods taping Elena's face to lampposts, bulletin boards, and the doors of churches. The stack of flyers seemed endless, each copy a desperate wish sent out into the world. Soon the community joined in. Friends and strangers gathered in church basements and school cafeterias, sorting maps and planning search parties. Volunteers in bright vests combed the woods behind Williams Elementary, stomping through the mud, calling Elena's name until their voices grew hoarse. Local businesses donated supplies, flashlights, bottled water, stacks of pizza for searchers who wouldn't rest. At the church, familiar faces gathered in small circles, holding hands, sharing stories about Elena. Some remembered her cheerful determination at the food pantry, others her gentle guidance in the after-school program. As dusk fell, a sense of solidarity settled over the group. They were fighting for one of their own, refusing to let her story end in silence. But behind every determined step was a current of fear. Rumors swept through town as quickly as the November wind. Some whispered that Elena had run away, crushed by the weight of impending motherhood and the specter of raising a child alone. Others spoke in hushed voices of someone she trusted, a boyfriend, a friend, a secret enemy who might have lured her into the shadows. For the first time in memory, Merrillville's sense of safety cracked. Neighbors locked their doors early, parents forbade their children from wandering after dark, and strangers' faces took on a new kind of suspicion. The local news carried Elena's story nightly, her photograph a fixture on every broadcast. The words "missing," "pregnant," "vanished without a trace" settled over the town like a suffocating fog. Every evening as the search stretched into another cold night, friends and family gathered on the Brooks' front lawn for candlelight vigils. Elena's high school photo, her laughter caught mid-giggle, her hands resting protectively on her unborn child, stood at the center of the gathering. Candle flames trembled in the wind, small beacons of hope in the darkness. Linda stood among her neighbors, her face raw and red, clutching a candle as if it alone could guide her daughter home. The vigils grew larger each night, filling the yard and spilling onto the sidewalk. Each gathering was a plea and a protest, a refusal to give in to despair. Prayers mingled with tears. Some nights, people sang hymns or shared stories of Elena's kindness, her stubborn hope, her ability to draw out laughter even in the worst of times. But beneath the hope, the community was fraying. Whispers traveled from kitchen tables to church pews. Who could do this? Why Elena? Was the town harboring a predator? Or had tragedy simply arrived, uninvited, in their midst? Theories twisted and grew with each retelling, and the certainty of safety that had once defined Merrillville evaporated. Inside her darkened house, Linda stared at the crib in Elena's room, still assembled and waiting, tiny clothes folded in neat stacks. Each item was a reminder of the future her daughter had been denied. She refused to sleep, afraid she'd miss a phone call or a knock at the door. Grief gave way to determination. She would not allow her daughter to become another unsolved statistic, another name lost to time. The search continued for days, then weeks, and hope was both a lifeline and a curse. Linda's voice grew hoarse from calling Elena's name, so But every night she lit a candle on the porch, refusing to let darkness have the final word. Friends left meals on her doorstep and messages in her mailbox. Some came simply to sit with her in silence, bearing witness to the ache that would not relent. In time, Elena's face became the symbol of fragile hope for the entire town, a reminder that some stories linger unfinished, and that even the safest communities are forever changed when tragedy chooses them. Merrillville would never be the same. In the cold aftermath of Elena's disappearance, the investigation moved quickly from hopeful searches to grim reconstruction. Merrillville police, joined by county detectives, pieced together the final hours of her life with methodical precision. One text, one footprint, one fragment of memory at a time. Every new detail brought both clarity and frustration, as if the truth remained hidden just behind a locked door. The timeline was carefully mapped out. Elena's last sighting, leaving the Calumet College gym, her breath curling in the frosty air, her belly prominent beneath her winter coat, was confirmed by security footage and friends' testimony. Her final text, sent at 9:51 p.m., was to Darius Coleman. "Meet me at Williams Elementary School." The message landed like a stone in still water, rippling out through the investigation. The police found Darius quickly. His name had always hovered in the background of Elena's life, a question that no one wanted to ask out loud. Darius was only 24, but his face was already worn with the weight of grown-up problems. He'd drifted from job to job since high school, carrying old dreams that never quite materialized. Lately, he seemed even more troubled, gripped by money troubles and the looming threat of child support. When detectives arrived at his apartment, Darius seemed almost relieved to be questioned. He insisted he hadn't seen Elena that night, that he'd stayed home, played video games, fallen asleep in front of the TV. His eyes darted from the detectives to the walls, restless and wary. When asked about the text, he shrugged, saying she must have gone somewhere else, maybe even left town. "We were talking again," he admitted, "but I didn't meet her." But Elena's phone records disagreed. She'd called Darius twice earlier that evening, and the last message, short, tense, full of expectation, pointed to a secret meeting only they knew about. Witnesses complicated the story further. A neighbor recalled seeing a man matching Darius's description near Williams Elementary around 10 p.m., standing by the fence, nervously glancing toward the woods. A jogger, passing by on the other side of the school, reported the same thing: a tall figure, dark coat, pacing near a silver sedan. Rumors began to swirl even before the police officially named a suspect. Darius's complicated history with Elena became the subject of whispered conversations at every local diner and church gathering. Some remembered the fights that spilled over onto front lawns. Others recalled how Elena, fiercely private, refused to say a bad word about him, even when pressed. The town's sympathy turned slowly to suspicion. Every flaw magnified, every mistake reinterpreted in the harsh light of tragedy. Yet for all the circumstantial evidence, there was nothing concrete to tie Darius to the crime. No fingerprints, no confession, no trace of Elena's body. The woods behind the school, scoured by volunteers and police dogs, yielded only silence and the chilling remnants of that night. A single muddy shoe, the twisted remains of her glasses, a scattering of coins from her purse, all washed by cold rain and time. As winter closed in, the case stalled. Public interest surged with each new headline, only to fade as leads dried up. Darius remained in town, shadowed by gossip and suspicion, insisting on his innocence to anyone who would listen. Elena's friends found themselves scrutinized as well. Each one questioned and re-questioned, their alibis cross-checked until nothing felt certain anymore. The town began to fracture. Some people clung to the idea that Elena had run away, driven by fear or desperation. Others were sure she'd been the victim of a crime, abducted, maybe worse. Candlelight vigils turned somber. The crowds grew thinner as hope faded. At the Brooks house, Elena's mother, Linda, refused to let go, refusing to box up her daughter's things or turn off the porch light. Each night, she stared out into the darkness, willing Elena home. Detectives kept coming back to Darius. He'd resisted fatherhood from the start. There were angry texts, harsh words exchanged, months of denial and avoidance. His friends described him as anxious and cornered, worried about the future and overwhelmed by the idea of raising a child. The police pressed him harder, hoping for a slip, a contradiction, something to break through his stonewalling. But Darius's story never changed. "I didn't meet her that night," he repeated. "She must have gone somewhere else." In the absence of a body or hard evidence, suspicion wasn't enough. The investigation ground down to a halt, the case file thick with unanswered questions and loose ends. Merrillville moved on, slowly, painfully, carrying the weight of Elena's absence like a bruise that never healed. For Linda and the few who refused to give up, the pain sharpened into something cold and determined. They continued to search, to call reporters, to keep Elena's story alive in the faint hope that someone, somewhere, knew more than they'd admitted. But as winter turned to spring, Elena's disappearance became just another mystery, receding into the shadows, unsolved, unfinished, unforgettable. And somewhere in those shadows, the truth waited, silent and patient, daring someone to finally bring it into the light. As autumn faded to winter, and Elena's story slipped from the headlines, a different kind of cold settled over Merrillville. In the beginning, there were always search parties, volunteers fanning out into the woods with flashlights and sticks, police combing through fields, rivers, and ditches. Every rumor, every shadow, every piece of clothing found in a ditch would set hearts racing, but always ended in disappointment. The world moved forward, days stacking into weeks, weeks bleeding into months, and then into years. The posters of Elena, once taped bright and hopeful across town, curled and faded in the wind, peeling from telephone poles and shop windows until only scraps remained. The town that once pulsed with urgency now bore the silent scars of loss. The candlelight vigils continued, but fewer people attended. The crowds thinned, faces grew tired, and the warm glow of hope became a quiet ritual for only the most faithful. At the center of it all was Linda Brooks, Elena's mother, who never stopped searching. She kept a candle burning on the porch every November 10th, marking the night her daughter vanished. Neighbors sometimes stopped by, dropping off casseroles or sitting with Linda on the cold steps, but the conversations were softer now, tinged with resignation. Inside the Brooks home, Elena's room remained untouched. The crib still stood beneath the window, dust gathering on its railing. Baby clothes, folded and sorted by size, waited in drawers that were never opened. On Thanksgiving, Linda set an empty chair at the table, her hands trembling as she placed a plate that would remain untouched. She spoke to Elena in whispers, sharing the little things, a bird at the window, a new recipe, an old memory. Her voice reaching out into the silence, as if sheer willpower could pull her daughter back from wherever she'd gone. For the rest of Merrillville, life pressed on. Children grew up, families moved away, new scandals filled the local news. But for those closest to Elena, time didn't heal. It simply stretched the wound, dulling the shock, but never easing the ache. Every November, Linda's porch light glowed a little brighter, a signal to the missing, a challenge to the darkness. Some nights, Linda dreamed she heard Elena's footsteps on the porch, or a gentle knock at the door. Each time she woke with her heart racing, chased by hope and then the familiar sting of reality. Over the years, the police investigation became a formality. Detectives changed, files were boxed and reboxed, and calls from Linda went unanswered more often than not. Darius Coleman stayed in town. His life shrunk by suspicion and regret, shadowed by the case that would never quite leave him. He found work where he could, always looking over his shoulder, avoiding the eyes of those who whispered about him in the grocery store or at the bar. Rumors clung to him, just as they had from the beginning, but nothing ever moved the case forward. For the friends Elena had left behind, guilt became a quiet companion. Melissa, her closest confidant, replayed their last conversation over and over. Was there something she missed? A warning she should have heard? At church, the youth group held Elena in their prayers, her name spoken less and less as the years passed. Some of her old classmates moved away, building new lives that Elena would never know. But her story traveled with them. Another cautionary tale, a whispered warning about trust and danger and the thin line between safety and tragedy. Still, every so often, a new tip would surface. A stranger's sighting, a rumor of a body in a shallow grave, a false confession from someone hungry for attention. Each time, hope flared and died again. And the Brooks family was forced to grieve anew. Journalists occasionally called for anniversaries or special features, but the urgency was gone. There were new stories, new victims, new cases for the world to chase. And yet, Linda refused to let go. Every year she hosted a small memorial on the anniversary of Elena's disappearance. Friends, a few reporters, and neighbors would join her, standing in the cold, with candles flickering against the November wind. They shared stories, remembered Elena's laughter, and watched the flames battling the darkness. On those nights, Merrillville felt smaller, more fragile too, as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for a miracle. Through it all, Linda's love never faltered. Her grief sharpened into resolve, her sorrow into a stubborn, steady hope. She refused to let Elena's memory fade, to let her story be reduced to a file number or a rumor. The pain was always there, a constant ache in her chest. But so was the promise. As long as she remembered, as long as she searched, her daughter would never truly be gone. And so the years marched on, each one a silent testament to the power of memory, to the courage it takes to keep hoping when the world insists on forgetting. The single candle burning on Linda's porch became a beacon in the night, a reminder that some battles are fought not with noise or violence, but with quiet faith and the refusal to surrender. But somewhere in the depths of Indiana's endless fields and shadowed woods, the truth slept undisturbed. The world moved on, but for the Brooks family, and for those who still cared, the question remained, unanswered, unyielding, waiting for the day the silence would finally break. 5 years had passed since Elena's disappearance. By now, the faded posters were gone from windows and telephone poles. The grass had reclaimed the dirt paths behind Williams Elementary, and even the police station had boxed her file and stored it on a forgotten shelf. Merrillville had almost, painfully, learned to live with the silence, Only Linda Brooks and a handful of Elena's friends refused to let the world forget, their hearts still raw each November as the town moved on. But the past has a way of clawing its way back into the present, refusing to be buried. In the fall of 2020, as a brittle wind rattled the bare trees along the old school grounds, a group of volunteers from a local metal detecting club met near the abandoned playground. The building was scheduled for demolition, and the town council had agreed to let hobbyists scan the area for coins and relics before the heavy machines arrived. Most of the group expected to find nothing more than rusty nails and soda cans. But one man, Rick Carter, brought a shovel and a stubborn curiosity. Rick started along the back edge of the school property, where the woods pressed close and the ground dipped toward a shallow ravine. The detector's rhythmic beeping was a familiar comfort, each alert a small thrill. Suddenly, near a tangled thicket, the tone changed, sharp, insistent, deeper than before. Rick dug carefully, peeling back layers of leaves and earth, his hands numb with cold and anticipation. 3 inches down, the shovel struck something hard. It was old, pitted with rust, but unmistakable. The blade of another, much older shovel, its handle snapped, wood blackened by rot. Rick hesitated. He could have moved on, but curiosity and a strange sense of unease drew him back the next day, along with a friend and a ground-penetrating radar device on loan from the local historical society. The radar showed a patch of disturbed soil near where the old shovel had rested. Word spread quickly. By the time the police arrived, yellow tape ringed the site, and the air buzzed with speculation. The search this time was different. It was more precise, more desperate, as if the entire community needed a resolution to finally heal. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and they barked and whined, circling the patch of ground where the earth was looser, where time and memory had failed to completely erase what was hidden. Nearby, beneath a collapsed section of fence, searchers found a small pile of discarded belongings: Elena's faded college ID card, her laptop, a pair of delicate earrings, and a cracked plastic keychain from her favorite coffee shop. The items had been ravaged by weather and time, but there was no mistaking their significance. Each object was a heartbreak, a proof that Elena had not simply run away. The discovery hit Merrillville like a thunderclap. 5 years of grief, rumor, and suspicion erupted into new headlines, new vigils, new police interviews. The quiet numbness that had settled over the town broke apart, replaced by the sharp, chaotic hope of answers long denied. The Brooks house, once a lonely beacon in the darkness, filled with visitors, reporters, old friends, neighbors who'd once given up. Linda, trembling, clutched her daughter's ID to her chest, tears finally spilling after so many years of restraint. Detectives who had once worked the case returned, older now, but the puzzle that haunted them was unchanged. With new evidence in hand, they mapped the old investigation against these fresh discoveries. The rusted shovel, the disturbed ground, the personal effects. Each was a fragment of the night Elena vanished, each a silent witness to something terrible and hidden. Rumors returned, sharper and more insistent than ever. Darius Coleman's name was once again whispered in every corner of town. He was questioned by police, his denials growing brittle with the weight of new suspicion. Others wondered aloud, was Darius alone? Had someone helped him? Or had a stranger used the deserted schoolyard to bury a secret, knowing that time and memory would blur the edges? For Linda, the new evidence was a double-edged sword. It confirmed her worst fears, yes, but it also validated the hope she'd clung to for so long, that Elena hadn't just vanished, that something had happened and someone was responsible. But most of all, it reopened wounds that never really healed, forcing her to relive every agonizing hour, every question, every lost dream. The town rallied around her once more. Vigils reignited, this time with the sharp tang of anger added to grief. Merrillville's collective heart ached for closure, for justice, for a reason to believe that tragedy could be answered with truth. But as detectives dug through old interviews, retested evidence, and pieced together timelines with the newfound urgency, one thing was clear: the silence was over. The cold case had cracked open, spilling secrets that could no longer be ignored. For the first time in half a decade, hope and fear mingled together in Merrillville, as the world waited to learn what or who would finally be unearthed. And beneath the wind, the old schoolyard whispered its own story, its secrets clawing their way toward the light. The discovery of Elena's belongings and the rusted shovel brought a tidal wave of attention back to Merrillville. News vans lined the street in front of the Brooks house, headlights cutting through the early morning fog as reporters set up cameras and microphones. The world seemed determined to witness the next chapter, to finally unravel the knot that had tangled itself around the town for half a decade. For Linda, hope and dread were inextricably linked. She clung to the new evidence: Elena's student ID, the battered laptop, the delicate earrings, as if each one could bring her daughter closer, if only in memory. Every object found in that muddy patch behind the abandoned school was a small and terrible treasure, proof that Elena's story was still unfinished, that she had not simply disappeared into the ether. The police, reinvigorated, picked up the old threads of the case with fresh eyes. Detectives pored over the files, comparing timelines and witness statements, seeking out anyone who might have remembered something, anything, that had been overlooked. Darius Coleman was brought in for questioning, his face hollow and eyes shadowed with years of suspicion and isolation. The weight of the town's fear and anger pressed down on him with every step. Inside the station, Darius sat beneath harsh fluorescent lights. He repeated his old story, insisting again and again that he hadn't met Elena that night, that whatever happened, he was not involved. But time and pressure are patient forces, and cracks began to appear. Detectives laid out the evidence: the text messages, the sightings of his car, the rumors of anger and fear that had swirled around him long before that cold November night. Then, quietly at first, family members came forward. A cousin remembered a drunken night years before, when Darius, overwhelmed and bitter, had muttered about messing up and doing something terrible. Another relative recalled how Darius had grown paranoid after Elena vanished, asking if anyone could ever really prove he'd been at the school that night. Their stories were scattered, memories faded by time and blurred by guilt, but together they painted a portrait of a man haunted by secrets. The confession, when it came, was not neat or clear. Darius didn't break down in tears or shout his guilt to the ceiling. Instead, the truth leaked out in fragments: a whispered admission to a cousin, an overheard phone call, a slip in a therapist's office. He never said the words plainly, but the meaning was unmistakable. He had been afraid, cornered by the thought of raising a child, terrified by the looming specter of child support and responsibility. In his desperation, he had lashed out, choosing cowardice and violence over honesty. Still, there was no body. Elena's remains had never been found, the earth holding tight to its final secret. Without a body, prosecutors struggled to build a case strong enough to deliver justice. The evidence was compelling. Darius's tangled confessions, the personal items buried in the woods, the pattern of lies and evasions. But there was always room for doubt. The law was clear, and absence, as it turned out, could be as powerful as presence. Linda watched the investigation unfold with a mix of hope and exhaustion. Each headline brought fresh pain and fresh questions. Could she ever truly know what happened? Would there ever be a day when Elena's absence didn't hollow her out? In the long hours before dawn, she walked the quiet halls of her home, brushing her fingers over baby clothes that would never be worn, remembering her daughter's laugh echoing from the kitchen, the sound now barely more than a memory. The town of Merrillville found itself divided. Some people whispered that justice was within reach, that closure was near. Others shook their heads, unwilling to believe the story could ever be truly finished without a body, without a grave to mourn at. Candlelight vigils resumed, their flickering lights reflecting both hope and anger. Old wounds reopened, and suspicion, once dormant, flared up anew. If Darius had not acted alone, who else in their midst had kept silent? For the police, the case became a symbol of everything that could go wrong in the search for justice. The detectives pressed forward, determined not to let the story fade a second time. They sifted through confessions and evidence, searching for the final piece, the one detail that might tip the balance. Every night, the abandoned school loomed in the darkness, a reminder that some truths, no matter how long they sleep, will not stay buried forever. In the end, there were no easy answers. Merrillville was left with scars, questions that would linger for generations, secrets that might never come fully to light. And for Linda Brooks, the ache of uncertainty would never truly heal. She kept the candle burning in her window, its small flame battling the shadows, a silent promise that she would never give up. Not for justice, not for closure, not for hope. For Elena, for every lost and silenced voice, for the belief that someday, even the deepest wounds might find peace in the light. The years following the latest surge of hope, brought by the new discoveries, passed in a fog of uncertainty and legal struggle. The case hovered on the edge of resolution, always near, never truly closing. Some nights, Linda Brooks found herself standing in the cold outside the courthouse, watching the press shuffle in and out, the blue lights of TV cameras flashing against stone walls. Reporters asked the same questions year after year. Did you ever imagine this would happen here? Do you have hope for justice? Merrillville's story became more than a local tragedy. National news picked up the case. The Vanishing Promise, they called it. Podcasters and YouTubers dissected every fragment. Elena's last night at Calumet College, the chilling message to Darius, the found shoe and broken glasses, the evidence unearthed years later behind the abandoned elementary school. Online forums grew wild with speculation. Some said Darius had confessed. Others insisted he was railroaded by rumor and grief. New theories spun out of old pain, but the truth, so close now, remained shrouded. And behind the headlines, a quieter story was unfolding, one that echoed far beyond the Indiana fields and wooded lots. The story of Elena Brooks wasn't just a tale of disappearance and dread. It was the story of Rochelle Stubblefield, a real young woman whose life had vanished into the void of an unsolved crime. Rochelle's story had unfolded in haunting parallel to Elena's. In the fall of 2015, just as leaves began to gather in drifts along the curbs and the air sharpened with approaching winter, Rochelle, a 20-year-old college student, 8 months pregnant, disappeared from her Indiana town. The details were eerily familiar. A hopeful text sent to her mother, a meeting arranged with a boyfriend on the outskirts of town, a car left abandoned, a trail gone cold in the woods. Her family, like Linda and those in Merrillville, had refused to let her memory fade. They printed flyers, called news stations, pleaded with law enforcement, and spent endless nights praying for a phone call that never came. For years, Rochelle was a ghost story told in worried whispers, a warning about trust and the shadows that can fall across even the safest-seeming lives. The investigation in Rochelle's case followed a grimly predictable arc. The boyfriend, once a source of comfort, quickly became the focus of suspicion. Like Darius, he denied meeting her that night, his alibi as thin as frost and just as easy to crack. Friends recalled tension, fights over the coming child, fear of responsibility and the future. Despite hours of interviews and mountains of paperwork, the search for concrete proof kept running into the same wall. Rochelle's body was never found. Yet sometimes, justice comes in pieces. Years after her disappearance, prosecutors brought Rochelle's boyfriend to trial. The case was built on a mountain of circumstantial evidence and a handful of whispered confessions. There was no body, no clear moment of reckoning. But the weight of loss, the pattern of lies, and the collective testimony of friends and family formed a picture that was impossible to ignore. The jury found him guilty. He was sentenced for a murder no one had seen, a tragedy buried in silence and shadow. For the Brooks family, and every family like theirs, the outcome was bittersweet. A conviction brought a measure of relief, but not the healing they had dreamed of. No amount of justice could fill the empty chair at Thanksgiving, or bring laughter back to a home that felt perpetually cold. The grave they visited was only a marker for memory, not for a body. The candle in Linda's window burned just as bright, a small light against the vastness of the unknown. In the years that followed, Elena's story, and Rochelle's, became lessons, warnings, and calls to action. Schools and colleges held assemblies about safety and trust, about the importance of sharing plans and listening for warning signs. Social workers, inspired by girls like Elena and Rochelle, renewed their determination to advocate for the vulnerable and overlooked. Merrillville, though forever changed, tried to reclaim its sense of community. Old wounds turned to scars, and the town learned to hold both grief and hope at the same time. Each November, families gathered to remember not only Elena, but every daughter, sister, and friend who had vanished without answers. The porch light in front of the Brooks house became a symbol, one that reminded everyone to look out for one another, to keep asking hard questions, to never stop searching. Some stories end with closure, others with acceptance. But the stories of Elena Brooks and Rochelle Stubblefield remained suspended in the space between. Their lives were more than their disappearances. They were dreams, laughter, and the unspoken promises of futures stolen too soon. And as long as someone remembers, each time a candle is lit, each time a mother calls her daughter to check in, each time a search party gathers in the cold, those stories remain alive, daring the world not to look away. Years passed, yet the story of Elena Brooks remained woven into the fabric of Merrillville, a thread of sorrow and warning, of hope and fragile remembrance. Each season brought new faces to the town. Children grew, and neighborhoods changed. But Elena's absence was felt in every familiar street and quiet backyard. It lived in the candles left flickering on porch rails, in the empty seat at the Brooks Thanksgiving table, in the cautious glances exchanged by neighbors at dusk. For Linda, Elena's mother, grief became a second shadow. She learned to move through the world with both love and loss at her side. Her daughter's laughter a memory echoing through hallways, her touch a ghost in every carefully folded baby blanket. Even as time tried to blur the sharpest edges of pain, Linda refused to let go of her daughter's story. She fought to keep Elena's name alive, to remind the world that her daughter was more than a tragedy. She was a life, a dream, and a promise to the future. Every November, the Brooks family and a handful of faithful friends gathered on the front lawn, candles in hand, sharing memories and small stories, a favorite song, a stubborn streak, a hope for the baby that would never be born. They spoke of Elena's kindness and determination, her habit of checking in with her mother, the care she showed to everyone around her. Each year, the gathering was a little smaller, a little quieter, but the light from their candles seemed, if anything, even brighter against the cold. Other families in other towns, watching from afar, recognized their own pain in Elena's story. For each mother who kept a porch light burning, for each sibling who set an extra place at the table, for each friend who replayed a last conversation, the loss was never just a headline or a cold statistic. It was a wound, raw and personal, that demanded to be witnessed. The world is filled with such wounds, disappearances unmarked by public memorials, lives cut short and left unanswered. Linda became an advocate, her grief shaping itself into action. She joined forums and spoke at vigils for missing persons, lending her voice to those whose hope was flickering in the dark. She pressed lawmakers to improve investigations, to fund search teams, to keep cases open and active even when the world's attention moved on. She learned that justice for families like hers was not only a verdict, it was the promise that their loved ones would not be forgotten. In time, Elena's story, like that of Rochelle Stubblefield and so many others, was taught in classrooms, discussed at parent meetings, featured in true crime podcasts and television specials. Her face became a symbol not just of loss, but of vigilance, community, and the duty to protect the vulnerable. Teachers used her story to urge students to share their plans, to trust their instincts, to reach out when something felt wrong. Officers used it as a reminder of the cost of unfinished work, of the pain that lingers when the truth is left undiscovered. Yet the questions remained. Some nights, Linda still found herself listening for footsteps on the porch, for a key in the lock, for a voice calling Mom through the quiet house. She wondered if there might ever come a day when the ache eased, when justice would bring peace instead of more questions. But she knew, too, that hope was its own kind of justice, each candle burning a challenge to the darkness, each story retold a refusal to surrender to forgetting. The legacy of Elena Brooks, and those like her, is not only found in legal files or memorial stones. It lives in every cautious heart, every act of kindness, every community that chooses to pay attention and care for its own. The lesson is both simple and profound. Safety cannot be taken for granted. Vigilance is a gift we owe one another. And every disappearance is not just a number, but a world, an entire future, lost and mourned. As Merrillville slowly rebuilt its sense of normalcy, old routines returned, but with a new understanding, a wariness at first, then a resilience. Young women walked together at night. Neighbors checked in with one another more often. Families shared their plans and insisted on daily updates. A community once lulled by the comfort of familiarity had learned to look beneath the surface, to recognize that darkness can hide anywhere, and that the cost of ignorance is measured in heartbreak. Each year, on the anniversary of Elena's vanishing, the Brooks family hosted a tribute in her honor. The crowd would gather, candles in hand, and stand in silence. Sometimes, someone would sing. Sometimes, a neighbor would share a memory. Each vigil closed the same way: a call to action, a reminder to stay vigilant, to act quickly when warning signs appear, and to honor those who are missing by refusing to let their stories slip away. Linda would often close the ceremony with words she'd come to cherish, her voice steady but aching with love. Some wounds only truth can heal. Please, don't forget. Look out for each other, tell their stories, and keep the light burning for those still searching for justice. Elena's memory lived on, a beacon in the darkness, a promise that every life matters, that hope endures, and that even in the face of the deepest loss, love has the power to reach across time, to comfort, to inspire, and, sometimes, to heal.